And this meeting is being recorded. My name is Courtney Berner. I'm the Executive Director at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives. And as some of you might know, we were planning to hold our regular Co-op Directors 101 training at the end of April. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced, our plans were changed. So we are adapting here and decided to offer the training in a slightly different format. We'll be doing 3 webinars over the next 3 weeks. So this Wednesday, today, and then we'll have webinars next Wednesday and the following Wednesday on different topics that we would have covered in person at that training. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more of this kind of education and training in the months ahead. So thanks for being here with us. So before we get started, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. So today's webinar will be approximately 20 minutes. Participant phone lines are muted. So if
60 minutes.
I'm sorry, 60 minutes. What did I say?
20
minutes. Sorry about that. 60 minutes. And participant phone lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. The format will be a presentation, and then there'll be a live question and answer session at the end. So if you have questions, you can submit them via the chat box over the duration of the webinar. So I'll be, me and my colleagues will be monitoring the chat box, and we will do our best to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. We won't be stopping in the middle of it. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the UWCC website fairly soon after it is completed. So as you know, we also asked for questions during the registration process. So we'll also do our best to answer some of the questions that came in through registration that pertain to topics covered in this webinar. So I would like to now introduce your presenter for the day, Kelly Maynard. So I've actually known Kelly for many years. We lived in Washington, D.C. at the same time before we moved to Madison for graduate school, and really got to know Kelly in the context of cooperatives when she was cutting her teeth at a small agricultural cooperative outside of Madison after we both finished grad school. So we were lucky enough to get Kelly to join the center in 2016, where she has been working as a co-op development specialist ever since. A lot of her work is connected to farmer cooperatives, but she also has worked with many other types of cooperatives and has worked and supported several boards in that work. So without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to Kelly.
Thank you, Courtney. And thank you all for joining today. I can't see how many folks have actually joined. I know we had upwards of 80 registrations, which is really exciting. The silver lining of doing things virtually is that people can join from faraway places. So thank you for taking the time. I do want to acknowledge what a weird time we're in, and that the current circumstances may very well have impacted your individual businesses and your cooperatives. And we really want to be a resource for you in any way that we can. So hopefully the information today is helpful. And if your co-op would like some additional help, whether it's related to COVID-19 or something else, please don't hesitate to reach out to us after the webinar today. So this diagram is, in some regards, it's just a flow of kind of delegation of authority and accountability in a co-op, kind of the different pieces in a co-op. You have your broad membership, the member owners who elect a board of directors. That board of directors does a lot of things that we will talk about today. A key piece of that is overseeing management and delegating a lot of operations to management. And then there may or may not be additional employees that report to management based on the size of your cooperative. And those employees are interacting with members often the most on the day-to-day. So today, what we're going to review are the broad responsibilities of the entire board. And then we'll discuss some broadly accepted standards of conduct for each individual director that shape your behavior as you fulfill those responsibilities. So where does the power and authority of the board come from? From a legal standpoint, it comes from state statute. So these two bits of text are from the two statutes in the state of Wisconsin under which cooperatives incorporate. The vast majority of you, if you're a Wisconsin cooperative, are incorporated under Chapter 185. Chapter 193 is a newer statute, although there are some co-ops that have used it. So legally, when it comes to that, the board, the cooperative is conducted, the business of the cooperative is conducted by and managed under the direction of the board. So the board is a very important body. But in addition to that statutory basis of your authority, it's important to remember that you are what we call a fiduciary agent, which means that you are ethically bound also to your membership and to the co-op to act in both the members and the co-op's best interests. I also I like to reference this publication, The Circle of Responsibilities for Co-op Boards by James Barta, that you can find through the USDA website at that link. And he really emphasizes that the ultimate authority of the board comes from the membership. The co-op is theirs, and without their desire to create and perpetuate the co-op, the board would not exist. So members are placing their trust, their needs, and authority in the board of directors of their own choosing. So that relationship to membership and that basis of your authority in the membership is really wonderful to remember. I forgot to mention this on the previous slide, I did include links here to the state statutes. As new directors, you may or may not be familiar with the state statutes. They're long, but they're not scary, and they're fairly easy to search and have nice tables of contents. It can be nice to peruse the sections about the board or sections where if you have questions. And they're always accessible online should something come up where you have a question about what is the legal answer to this question. You can look in the statute for yourselves. So as a board, you can delegate the tasks of operations to management, to committees, but that responsibility always rests with the board. And so as you develop yourself as a director, as the board develops, if and when you hire staff, it's really important to think about having a really strong board that can work with a manager and strong management on an equal partnership basis, and that they work together as a team, and not to forget the really important role that the board has in guiding the co-op. So these are the 7 kind of generally recognized responsibilities of all co-op boards. And this is regardless of the state that you're in, the sector or type of cooperative. This is what boards must do to meet their obligations, both under law and other guiding sources. And you'll notice as we go through them that these responsibilities are really interconnected and support each other, and that not fulfilling one will weaken your board's ability to fulfill others. So representing co-op membership, you have to remember that you need to be an unbiased voice for all members. You are members of the co-op, but when you put on your board hat, when you walk into the boardroom, you are in a fundamentally different role. It's good to think about what is balanced representation of the membership. That might be based on geography, that might be based on scale of some sort. There could be other metrics, but thinking about how to have a board makeup that is most likely going to be best able to fully represent the membership. And also think about what are the mechanisms by which the board hears from the membership. These can be both formal and informal. You can do surveys if there's very specific questions you have, input you want. You can have regular member input portions at board meetings. You can do informal checking in with members, or phone, text, email, or co-op events or other events. But thinking about what are those open lines of communication so that you are hearing from membership on a regular basis. And also that recognizing that you won't be able to meet all member needs all the time, right? So as a director, you have to balance what members want and need with what the co-op is able to do for them. And you, as directors, are in a unique position to understand that as being people who are more attuned with the financial situation and other resource situation of the cooperative. A huge part of what the board does is establish policy. So broadly, the entire membership would vote on a change to the cooperative bylaws, but the board is authorized to vote on and adopt policies on behalf of all of the members. You want to start from a common and defined mission and vision. And again, in terms of that member input piece, knowing what the members want in the business. It is also the point of policies is to enable other people to do the work. So this, if you are a co-op that has a large established co-op that maybe has lots of staff, a lot of the policies allow the day-to-day operations to take place within a framework that the board sets up. If you're a smaller or newer cooperative, maybe you have only one or a few hired staff, or you're a working board doing things by committees. And even so, these policies will guide the things that you do. There will be policies that are specific to how the board functions and does its jobs. There'll be policies that touch on all aspects of the business. So there'll be policies that touch on the various aspects of the responsibilities that we talk about today, policies regarding finance, operations, human resources. Policies keep a board from revisiting the same discussions and decisions over and over again. And they, again, are a way for the board to keep their eyes on the big picture and for a manager, group of staff, or other ways that operations get done to happen on the day-to-day without people always having to check back in. There's a note here about policies being flexible, right? There might be policies in which you really want to be very rigid, but for the most part, when it comes to operations, it's good to have policies that allow some flexibility and adaptability to situations that you may not have anticipated when the policy was written. So again, another very important role of the board is hiring and supervising management. If you're a small co-op, you may only have one or a few staff. Excuse me. Larger co-ops can have dozens or hundreds of staff. The board typically hires and directly supervises that top manager. It might be a management team. Co-ops in the startup phase, excuse me, I'm sorry, might not have any staff, and so it's a working board, and that board may do work via committee. But in the same vein, those committees or working groups should be accountable to, supervised by, and evaluated by the whole board. You'll want to have kind of set out clear expectations for that manager or management team or working group. And it's good to conduct evaluations at a minimum on an annual basis. You know, what were the goals to be achieved? Were they met? You know, evaluations can include, again, input from members, things like that. It's really important to have open channels of communication with your membership. The board management relationship is really critical to a healthy business. So the board is responsible for acquiring and protecting the co-op's assets. So this is everything from the members' equity in the business, physical things that you own, that the co-op owns. Part of fulfilling this responsibility is making sure that there is a robust accounting system in place, and that there's good checks and balances in terms of how funds are used, and checking back once things have been communicated, like budgets. You need to make wise use of the resources that the co-op has. This includes the time of the board, the time of membership, the time of staff. Larger co-ops will most likely engage in annual audits. As a small co-op, you can certainly do an internal audit, not pay for a third-party audit, but doing a check, you know, have we kept the accounting system up to date and clean? Are we accounting for everything? And this is a place where it is absolutely okay to ask for help. The board needs to preserve the co-op's character. So there's a couple of pieces of this. There's the character of the business being a co-op versus another business type. I'll show this slide of the 7 co-op principles. I know a lot of co-ops that have these up, you know, in their office spaces, that refer to them on a regular basis, make sure that they're in a co-op member and director materials. And especially if you have managers and staff, making sure that they understand what it means for the business to be a cooperative and not something else. There may be policies that touch on this. And a piece of this is ongoing education to the membership, to directors, to staff. There's another piece of this that it has to do with the culture of the organization. And you can examine the way that the business does things and create policies from that, if those are things that you want to be codified in the culture and character of the organization. The board needs to assess the co-op's performance. This will almost certainly be financial performance. So you'll need to be seeing financial statements on a regular basis. You know, what are the objectives that you've set for a certain time frame? Maybe it's an annual budget. Maybe there are certain sales goals or something like that. Performance also has to do with non-monetary means, right? What are the members' needs that have been expressed, and how well is the co-op meeting them? And is the board being effective? Our center has worked with boards to do self-evaluation, right? How are we doing as a board? How are we doing as individual directors in our role? It is always good to check in on that. And the last piece of these responsibilities is to communicate and inform membership. And again, as with receiving member input, this can be both formal and informal mechanisms. An informed membership is much more likely to be engaged with and supportive of the operations and projects of the co-op. You might get better chances of members participating on committees, feeling interested in and empowered and prepared to run for the board, and then also able to give informed and constructive feedback to the board. A member that understands the successes of the year, the challenges that the co-op is facing, decisions that are being made, can give very relevant feedback and know what needs they have that the co-op might be in a place to meet versus not. I know that we received several questions with the registration in relation to board turnover and kind of continuity of knowledge. And this is a place where if there's very regular ongoing information and communication with membership, if and when some of those members come onto the board, they're starting from a place of already having some idea of what's been going on. They're not starting from nothing. And so this, this responsibility can serve a lot of different purposes and ultimately lead to just a much healthier business overall. So, getting back to this fiduciary duty, you as a director have to protect the interests of the members and the co-op as you're fulfilling all of these responsibilities. And when you think about what is expected from you as an individual director, these are these standards of conduct, we call them, that are not specific to co-ops. They're for corporate directors generally, and they've been developed over years of various judicial decisions and legislative action. So the duty of loyalty is really about not representing special interests of either yourself or another group over the membership as a whole. Another piece of fulfilling the duty of loyalty is disclosing conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest come up all of the time in business and in other scenarios, and the existence of a conflict of interest isn't the problem. The problem comes when it's not disclosed. Hopefully, established co-ops may have policies in place around disclosure of conflicts of interest and how a board might proceed if a director has one. Maybe they don't participate in a vote or something like that. If you're a new co-op, this is a place where you should consider developing some policy around what should happen when conflicts of interest arise. So ways to meet the duty of loyalty, we talked about them. Having policies around conflict of interest, around non-compete clauses. It's important to know who are going to be the designated spokespeople or spokesperson for the board, so that the messages coming from the board are not scattered. And you might empower all directors to speak on behalf of the board or the organization, but having clarity of message is important there. A piece of this is once a board has gone through a discussion and made a decision, in the minutes you'll record the vote in yays or nays, but what is publicly communicated is the final decision when you're wearing your board hat. You'll see this note about an executive session at the end of every board meeting. This comes up in a number of slides. And this is really just an opportunity to give an open space with only the directors around the table, so no staff, no other members. This would be an opportunity where someone might say, hey, I have a conflict of interest. I have a concern related to my ability to, something going on with meeting duty of loyalty, and it's a confidential space. So we recommend, and we'll touch on this at the during the session next week about having this executive session. The duty of care. So we had a number of questions submitted with registration about the qualifications to be a director. You are not expected to be, a financial or legal expert. We tell people that as a director, you are presumed to have knowledge of the co-op's books and records, and you're expected to have the degree of skill, diligence, or reasonable care that an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in similar circumstances. So given that you have access and should be regularly examining, financial statements, other indicators of cooperative performance, being aware of the co-op's policies and the bylaws, those are things that, to meet the duty of care, you need to read, you need to pay attention to. If there are things, whether it's in the finances or something else, that you don't understand or have questions about, you absolutely have the right to rely on legal counsel or accountants, officers, employees, and committees of the cooperative and other expert advisors. So, and we'll touch on this director liability a little more at the end, but we can't predict the future, so you won't get into trouble as a director for making what we call the wrong decision, a decision that doesn't pan out the way we'd hoped, but you can get into trouble for careless, uninformed, or conflicted decisions. This duty of care also goes hand in hand with the questions about director transition, right? So thinking about, sorry, I didn't move to the next slide. In keeping up with meeting minutes, financial documents, grant and proposals, loan requests, things like that. Really thinking through the system that the board has to bring on new directors, so when ideally they get some sort of packet of information that at a minimum has, articles, bylaws, policies, some financial statement, history, some meeting minutes. And, considering a board mentorship program. So if you're a new director, this is something that you could maybe ask for or propose, is there someone who's been on the board a long time who can be your mentor as you come on, both to kind of get you up to speed with the things that have been going on, the important decisions of the moment, and help with that transition and continuity and institutional knowledge. This is also a place where if your co-op has gone through, has experienced something that you feel is an important part of your history and needs to be reflected in how you do business, then I would say that it's ripe for a policy. So it doesn't just need to live in someone's head. We experienced this situation and we responded in this way. If that's what if you want that to be what the co-op does in the future, regardless of whether you step off the board, that would certainly be a place to consider policy. Lastly, as a director, to meet your duty of obedience, you have to follow the law. So this is, federal, state, and local laws. this is, keeping apprised of the Chapter 185 or 193, or this, if you're in another state, the state statutes under which you're incorporated, and then your cooperative's articles of incorporation, bylaws, and policies. As a director, you need to model meeting and abiding by all of these documents. There we had several questions about, overlap of tasks and responsibilities between board and staff, board and members. We are, during the next week, when we talk about tools for an effective board, we'll touch a little bit on that, but I do want to say that within your board, you can absolutely have, some sort of board responsibilities document that maybe includes a bunch of the, what we've discussed today. You can outline specifically also what the officers are responsible for. And then if you have members who are supporting the board in some way, on a committee or something else, that we'll talk next week about committee charters, and there isn't necessarily a cut and dry answer for like what the board should do and what a committee or volunteer member volunteer or something should do. The most important thing is to write it down and be clear and in agreement about who is responsible for what, so long as the board is not passing off the major responsibilities we discussed today to someone else. Those legally you can't do that. But I can't emphasize enough, writing things down, having a small, can be a fairly brief document. This is what I'm going to do. This is what the timelines in which I'll share things with the board, and vice versa. So we often get questions about director liability. This quote about the business judgment rule comes from that document I mentioned at the beginning about the circle of responsibilities for co-op boards. And so basically, if you act in good faith and you're not acting against cooperative documents and other things, if you're not self-dealing, committing fraud, you aren't liable for decisions that end up just being the wrong decision. You won't be liable for mistakes, honest mistakes, if you were exercising your informed and best judgment. Things do go wrong. So one thing I do want to mention is that there are proactive ways a board can minimize the co-op's risk of a lawsuit or other legal action. Proper flows of information, communicating regularly with membership, having that good open relationship, and channels of communication with management, good use of committees of the board, directors training, membership training. This notion of a legal audit is something that wouldn't be free, but maybe a larger co-op considers every once in a while, and that's instead of someone looking at your finances, which would be a financial audit, it would be someone looking at kind of your structural documents, policies, bylaws, making sure that all of those are things in line. There's this note in the Wisconsin, the Chapter 185 statute that co-ops must indemnify a director to the extent he or she has been successful on the merits or otherwise in the defense of a proceeding for all reasonable expenses. So basically what this means is we actually have in statute that a co-op, if the director has been acting in good faith, was making their informed decisions with their best judgment, that the co-op pays for the costs incurred by a director who is responding to some sort of legal action in their role as a director, not for something that has nothing to do with the co-op. Also, lots of larger co-ops have directors and officers insurance. This is something we recommend co-ops look into. This is another way to just help offset the expenses that might be incurred by the co-op if it is indemnifying a director, right? So a directors and officers insurance would help to cover that. So, back to the beginning again, there's a lot of different types of power and decision making that happen in a co-op. They're here, it shows them kind of being delegated in a circular manner. The membership weighs its interests when electing a board. The board fulfills its roles in providing guidance and policies for management carry out those policies and potentially hire employees based on the size of your co-op, and those employees are doing a lot of the day-to-day and oftentimes interacting the most with members on a daily basis. And while that kind of indicate a flow in one direction, the kind of flow of accountability goes really in the other direction. And I encourage you to remember that as a director, thinking about being accountable ultimately to the membership. So again, if you're a director in a new co-op, I'm sorry, a director in an established co-op, there's probably a lot of policy that's already in place. So you could certainly kind of look through it. What are these systems of delegation and accountability? If you're a new co-op, this would be a place for setting up policy. This notion of speaking with a unified voice is when you have factions, when you have people sending different messages, when it can lead to problems pretty quickly. And remembering, at the end of the day, it's a people organization, right? And so the relation, you can write lots of policies, but at the end of the day, the relationships are really key especially to withstanding stressful situations. And so that you don't want to neglect building strong and positive relationships. As a director, never stop learning, whether it's participating in events like today, reading, looking at resources, reaching out to us with questions. We're happy to help there. And recognizing that this notion of eyes out or eyes in, fingers out, all of these responsibilities and duties are about you having the big picture of the organization so you can fulfill your role as a director, but not necessarily meddle while wearing your director hat in lots of the day-to-day. And ultimately that you want the board to be a really strong entity that has equal power to management or staff who are in most cases doing a lot of the day-to-day work. It can feel like they know more of what's going on, and which can lead to them feeling like they have a lot of power. But the board, because everything comes back to the board, you'll want to make sure that you have a strong, cohesive board that can balance management. So that's the end of the formal presentation. I want to acknowledge some content that has come from Margaret Bow, a partner of ours at USDA Rural Development, and also this document that I've referred to that I highly recommend that you take a look. And now I think we'll go answering more questions that have come in by chat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelly. That was great. So I let Kelly catch her breath, and I will go ahead and answer a couple of the questions that have come in through the Q&A in the chat. So one question just right off the bat, someone asked, will these slides and will the slides be available after the presentation. Absolutely, both the slides and a recording of this webinar will be available on our website quite soon. So look for them there. So on to another question. How do directors represent all members if there are different outcomes for different members or for different districts? It's a really great question. And I think it points to one of the biggest challenges for directors, really. And so when we say representing all members, it means considering all members. It means considering the impacts to all members. It doesn't mean that all members always get their way or that all members are going to be impacted equally by a decision or pleased with the outcome of a decision. And so really one of the hardest jobs as a director is balancing the needs and well-being of members with the needs and the short-term and long-term sustainability of the cooperative. And so ultimately, as a director, your responsibility is to the cooperative, to the health of the cooperative. And your goal is to consider and really decipher the best path forward for the most members that's going to make that co-op successful, so that the co-op can continue to meet members' needs for the long term. So it's a great question. There's not a cut and dry answer. I don't know if Kelly, you have something you want to add to that, or
No, I think I think I would only just say, there will be, as a director, you are a member of the co-op, and the co-op is serving you in some way, and it can be, and so it can be extra important to recognize what might be influencing you in a decision. Is that from you as a member, wearing your member hat, or you wearing your director hat? And that even as a director, you may ultimately end up making a decision on behalf of the co-op that isn't the best decision for you personally as a member. You were considered what you needed just as long like the other members. But yeah, it's hard. It's wearing a director hat is there's a lot of pulling in different directions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So another question that came in, which is another hard one. So what can we do if a board member takes business from the co-op and defects? So I happen to know that this is a food co-op, an agricultural cooperative, farmer-owned cooperative that this question is coming from. So this happened in our co-op without any consequences to the bad actors, who then left the co-op with our best customer. So I'm going to assume that there was a member agreement in place. So particularly in farmer-owned cooperatives, the members typically sign an agreement, and often when they join, and maybe every year, and that agreement often stipulates the rules around member behavior related to customers of the cooperative. So all I really have to say on this is that if you didn't have a member agreement in place that discouraged that sort of bad, what I'll call bad behavior, or self-dealing, as Kelly called it earlier, I would certainly put together a member agreement, and that's something that Kelly could help you with, or one of us at the center could help you with. But really, you can discourage bad behavior with policies and with member agreements. You can't totally prevent it. People will be people in all their good and bad ways, and so how are there policies or things you can put in place that you've learned from this situation that might reduce the chances of it happening again? Kelly, anything to add on that?
No, I think when Courtney in the intro mentioned the co-op where I cut my teeth, and we agonized for a long time over the language in a non-compete agreement and clause in a member agreement, and then with someone who was going to actually be working as kind of on helping with sales for the co-op. And yeah, those non-compete clauses can feel scary, and it's a balance, right? You can't get everything all the time, and so it's you have to give something up in terms of your rights sometimes as an individual business if you want the co-op to succeed. And so that was certainly our experience when I worked with that co-op. But ultimately, it served them very well, agreeing to this non-compete clause was good in the end, but it took some good discussion time to get there. Yeah, it's hard, but it's something to consider putting in place as soon as you can as you're getting things going.
All right, Kelly, do you want to go ahead and take, I want to make sure we have time to answer a few of the questions that were submitted with registration. Do you want to take time to answer a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. So I tried to address a few of them throughout the presentation. There was another one that came in about how do you balance open information and confidentiality? And Courtney, I'd be interested in your opinions on this too. I think part of that is, a discussion. What has been, what are the desires of members in terms, what do members desire to know, and what kinds of information, really should be kept confidential, right? So there will be, HR decisions, decisions around hiring and maybe firing a manager that will have some confidential pieces to them. Otherwise, I think it is kind of up to the cooperative, and this can be, how you address this would be very different whether you are a co-op that is just getting going and just kind of setting the culture around this, or whether you're a long-term established co-op and you're trying to change something. I think part of it would be if you're an established cooperative. I think this question came from an established cooperative. Hearing from membership, how much do they want to know, or information would they want to have access to on a regular basis? Is there, a critical mass of membership that wants more information than they're getting, so long as it doesn't, violate, certain HR policies or things like that. And recognizing that if you are a large cooperative, there's information that you are privy to as a board, sensitive business information that you will use that you will use to compete in the marketplace, that could potentially be detrimental to the co-op if they got out beyond the bounds of membership. And so, I think that's this, it's not a cut and dry answer, but thinking about, what members, you can have people, it's a lot harder to keep a large membership accountable to all these things. There's just greater risk that someone might share something. And so is it information that will ultimately, if shared outside the co-op, come back and be harmful to the co-op? In a new co-op, you can be thinking about from the get-go, what is your culture? Do you want to have, open book accounting? Do you, what is your, and it also, I think, will be impacted by the size that if you're going to be probably always a fairly small co-op, worker owned or otherwise, it'd be a lot easier to share most everything with everyone. Courtney, any thoughts on that?
No, I think I don't have anything to add.
There was also a question that came in about a director's personal financial liability if a co-op is having trouble paying its bills. You had some thoughts on that, I think.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, question came in, and that might be a timely question right now, given
absolutely
the current environment, which is, as Kelly alluded to earlier, probably challenging for a lot of your cooperatives. And so the answer to a board member, that question about a board member's personal financial liability, if you can't pay your bills, depends a bit on the member, that director's relationship with the co-op. So there are a few different ways that members, are financially entangled with their co-op. So you likely, when you became a member of your co-op, made an equity contribution, you bought your share in the cooperative. So should the cooperative go out of business, you might lose that money. Maybe you're a member of a grocery cooperative and you made a loan to that cooperative when it was getting started or when it expanded. When Willie Street did their expansion, I bought a member bond. So if the co-op were to ultimately go out of business, I might lose that money. Then there's the issue of in very small cooperatives, sometimes people, board members, founding members are asked to sign a personal loan guarantee in order to access debt, access financing for that business. That is another case where you might have some personal financial liability, but that's not tied to your role as a director. That's tied to, that guarantee. So all that is to say, what I'm about to say doesn't apply to potential financial obligations to debtors should the cooperative go under. But if, as a director, you have fulfilled your duties of care, loyalty, and obedience that Kelly just explained, if you have done those, then you don't have any financial liability personally as a director. Like you can, you won't get in trouble for a bad decision. You can get in trouble for an uninformed decision, a conflicted decision, a decision where you were being, dishonest and weren't prepared, or, really keeping your eye on the ball. So, but really a cooperative, like any other type of corporation, is if you're organized as a cooperative corporation, you have legal protection. There's legal separation between you and that cooperative. So that's my answer to that question. Do you want to add anything, Kelly?
No, I mean, I think, we're hearing, I think if the financial picture is bleak, whether it's because of the current pandemic, related to that or not, I think the co-op might really, need to take a hard look at, what do we have to liquidate? Are we operating? Have we been operating in a way? Is this a blip, or are we operating in a way that is just not sustainable over the long term? And that would not be a pleasant conversation to have and thing to consider. That would be the kind of really hard thing to think about is, is this like a situation that is uncommon, or is this going to be a recurring thing? And in which case, what is the big, there's got to be a bigger picture strategy to figure out the financial picture. I don't know, liquidating, I don't know all the legal things involved in filing for bankruptcy, but that would, if the picture was really bleak, I think there'd be the board would need to have some of those bigger conversations around why is it that we're not able to pay our bills. There were a couple questions submitted through registration around, are there any responsibilities that different or additional responsibilities with COVID-19 as a director? I mean, I would say that this now would be the time to be exceptionally fulfilling all of these responsibilities, right? Doing everything you can to be kind of on top of what's going on with the financial picture, communicating with membership both ways, hearing from them, letting them know what the co-op is doing, how the pandemic is affecting the co-op, what kinds of decisions the board might need to be considering, right? I mean, if the board has to consider something like some sort of a pay cut, right? Maybe it's the farmer pay price, or a wage cut if it's a worker co-op. If people have been kept kind of in the loop about why that would be the consideration, and what some of the rationale is going into that consideration, I think there's less likely to be backlash if and when a hard decision has to be made, right? If it's not a total surprise. So yeah, but there are no special additional pandemic responsibilities for you as a director. Just really thinking about how the ones we discussed today are being met. And I had something that I was going to add. Oh, there was a question submitted about hiring in terms of hiring staff and having a committed staff that sticks with you. I think so. A lot of the work that I do is with farmers, right? And more tends to be with smaller scale farms. And something that comes up a lot and is at the individual farm level is people will say, this isn't true at every farm, but I want to be a farm. I don't want to be a human resource manager, right? And so just thinking at the individual farm level, I've worked on a lot of projects thinking about how farmers effectively manage staff, employees. And we are not, HR is a special set of skills, right? And if you're a small co-op and you have, one staff person or only a few staff people, and the board plays this important, HR role in its relationship to that manager. And so it's a great place to seek out some training. And I would just say that the one way, it's businesses' reputations got out in the world, right? And so, and also people who are looking for jobs and really qualified, potentially qualified employees that would hopefully stick with you for a while, hopefully are critically looking at a job description, at what their relationship would be with their supervisor, which in this case, would be a board if that person would be in a managerial position. And so really just thinking about what is the board culture around that interaction with a manager, and which also then sets the tone for that manager's interaction with additional staff that they may bring on. A lot of it just has to do with general workplace culture, right? And what makes people happy and want to be there, and thinking about how you from the beginning, indoctrinate feels like a scary word to use, but educate a manager and staff about the cooperative model, about your co-op's history, about what makes you special and exciting as a business. All of those are little things that can help lead to having a dedicated staff that sticks around. But yeah, seeking out assistance for your role, that HR role that you play, that in terms of that oversight responsibility of management, is there's no shame in asking for assistance in fulfilling any of this, right? It's a lot rests on your shoulders, and that's why centers like ours are here, to support you in the ways that we can. Are there any other questions that have come in?
We are out of time.
Okay.
So do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. All right. So on that note, this is just, you can find all of this information if you go to our website also, uwcc.wisc.edu. And this is the range of co-op development specialists that we have on staff, and kind of their areas of expertise. We've got representation from a lot of different co-op sectors on the call. So absolutely reach out to us with more specific questions to your co-op. And thank you. And Courtney, just the reminders.
Yeah, thank you again for being here. This is the first time we've delivered this content in this format. So thanks for being with us. We are about to close the webinar. You will receive a thank you email shortly, and there will be a link to an evaluation. We would really appreciate it if you would complete that evaluation. Again, this is the first time we've delivered content like this in this format. So we're looking for feedback on how we can improve in the future and what went well. As I've said a couple times, the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be available on our website in the next couple days. And I hope that you will join us the next 2 Wednesdays, same time, same place, for the next 2 webinars in this series. So the next one will be on tools for an effective board. And the third webinar in the series is Cooperative Finance 101. So if you, I captured all of your questions in a Word doc. I've been doing that. And so if you didn't get your question answered, we would be happy to have a conversation offline with you. I know there were a couple of questions about housing cooperatives that we didn't have time to get to today. So let's connect after the webinar and we can talk about that a little bit more in depth. So thank you again for being here. Stay healthy, stay well. Hope that you continue to do okay during these very strange times. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.